I remember as a little girl, a sudden shift in the atmosphere in my house. I didn't always notice it right away. It's almost like I suddenly realized it was there. I can't explain it with words, I can't describe it accurately, but my tummy knew that things had taken a turn and that I was likely to face abuse again. I knew it was coming. Little subtle things that I witnessed and observed, a phrase, an expression, an interaction between someone else, and my neck hairs would go up. And I was little. I remember my first experience with this sort of sudden awareness of things not being right when I was, in Kimball School. So I was 9 or 10. As I've grown up and gone through life, I can look back on times that I had the same feeling of something's not quite right. So as I dive into episode 225, it's this little moment, this little realization where something isn't right. If it were in a TV show or a movie, the music would change. The scenery and what you're looking at might be no different, but the music changes and it sends a message that something is afoot. The undertow has arrived and is strong. Clouds are rolling in. The wind has changed. The air smells different. Whatever it is, human beings, mammals, have incredible instincts to notice these subtle behaviors and shifts in the atmosphere. As I've done this podcast over the past several years and told stories and revisited stories, one of the most difficult things for me to do is to pay attention to the shift. Not to notice it. I notice the shift. I don't listen to the shift. I don't alter my behavior because of the shift. Sometimes I buckle down, try to keep things the same, maintain balance. The picture that comes to my mind is being on a boat in an ocean, and the ocean is calm. And as the ocean gets more rough, or it starts to become dark and the air smells different, rather than batten down the hatches and be proactive, no, the weather's fine. 10 more minutes, it's going to be fine. Like I talk myself into thinking everything is okay. And of course, we're on a boat in the middle of the ocean, one big wave, and that would be it. I did an episode a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, about friendships and how I make the same mistakes in friendships, that it's easy for people who want to be hurtful toward me to say I'm the problem because I'm the common denominator in friendship after friendship after friendship that fails. And then my fabulous therapist, Carolina, pointed out that I find people that will do this to me. And they find people like me that they can do this too. It's a match made in heaven. And the harder I have to work to get people to like me, the harder I work. Rather than stepping back, stepping away. I've had a really crappy couple of weeks. I know the last 3 or 4 episodes and emails, all I've done is complain about what a bad place I'm in. I don't do that to bring you down. If anything, I do that to give you permission that it's okay to fall apart sometimes. And I can see some areas that I need to change, but sometimes I'm just befuddled. I had a school board situation recently that sort of woke me up to the subtle shifts in the air. And they started about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 2020, 5 years ago. It's been a while. It was just a sudden change in the dynamic of meetings. Very new board members insisting on things be a certain way, and other board members acquiescing, and a shift in the behavior of other board members that I'd known for a long time. And just that subtle shift. And I remember, because I had been on the board for a long time and then moved on to the executive committee secretary and then vice president, and assuming I would move into president. And I remember we had a shift in leadership, and all of a sudden I wasn't even on the executive committee anymore. I was just a board member. And the people on the executive committee were like in their first term. I had a hard time wrapping my head around that because it just felt unfair to me, and disrespectful. I've worked hard and spent a long time on the board. And I've had a very difficult time navigating my place on the board since then. And I fall into defensive behavior sometimes. I get angry. And there are times when I, in hindsight, I play right into what's going on. With the death of Science Guy a few months ago, and me sort of re-looking at a lot of my own high school experiences, and then retelling that my coaching dismissal at Bow, and really looking into what's happened to me, and then deciding to sort of dive into the job loss retell, everything has sort of come together. It's like locks in a tumbler, click, 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 click. So the recent school board issue was just behavior by board members that I thought was inappropriate and wrong. And I followed protocol, I thought, relatively rigidly. I was accused of not. I was accused of, I don't know, a lot of things. I don't do well in that kind of confrontation. I sit there, no lie, as articulate as I can be. When someone's screaming at me, I don't know what to do. My mind just goes blank. It's like I shut off. And this is when I do believe past traumas and past experiences do affect my behavior. I do not believe they affect my ability to discern right from wrong or to feel justified in thinking that something is wrong when it is. Two things are big for me. I insist on justice and fairness. Things have to be done right. And I don't like being told to be quiet. Currently, after a pretty contentious board meeting, I've heard from nobody, not one board member. That's more telling than the horrifying words that were shared in that board meeting. It's ugly. I am quite sure there has been much conversation amongst others. We have a very, very tight-knit board, which brings me to my first major point. When I first ran for school board, I was just in the wake, not even a year, from losing my job in the district. I signed my separation agreement in January of 2011, and my first board meeting was in January of 2012. Chris Rath was not happy to see me there. She actually gave me a hard time. She did a lot of what many current board members do now, is took my words and my realities and manipulated and twisted them to fit a narrative that wasn't accurate. Sets me off my feet a little bit. Turn the tables. They call it word salad. Some people call it gaslighting. It's hard to know for sure exactly what's going on. So I realize in processing all of this that a lot of my recent anger is just feeling very unresolved and unvindicated in some of the bad things that have happened to me. And there are many, many people who would say, oh my God, let it go already, move on. And I get it. People don't like hearing these things. But I find that even those who let it go and move on carry with them all the parts of the experience that are unresolved. So I went online to WKXL and found some radio shows, which you listened to last week, I hope. If you haven't listened, please do, because they'll supplement this story well. And listening to me share my stories about what happened to me on the radio show, and then rereading several blogs I wrote, so many of those feelings have come back. It's hard. But when I look at what's really bothering me, it's the fact that I lost a job and really did nothing wrong. I truly did nothing wrong. 99% of what I was accused of doing was completely erroneous and false. Did not happen. I was accused of things like stealing money from a booster club. I ended up paying for hundreds of sweatshirts that sat in boxes in my attic forever. I tried to sell them at a track meet once and I was admonished to stay away. I was accused of coming in late twice a week without permission, and I'd gone and asked permission to drop off Molly at preschool. I'd received permission for that, or drop the girls off at school. I should have gotten it in writing. I didn't, and that was a mistake. It was like I often said it was like being stabbed to death with a fork. So when I started writing about it, it was because I had filed suit against the Concord School District, and Roy, the whole reason I lost my job in the first place, and his ex-wife Amy, Roy had just brought Chris Rath to court for a Freedom of Information, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. He wanted copies of emails. She claimed they didn't exist anymore. She claimed that there weren't any. And when she showed up in court, she had this big box full of reams of paper. Eat the emails that quote unquote didn't exist. Roy just thought he would testify and be able to walk away. And she had to go on the stand and he got to question her. It's too bad he didn't have a lawyer with him because I think he could have gotten further than he did. However, for all the crappy things I say about him and all of the horrifyingly bad things he's done to me, he put a lot of time and effort into trying to find justice for me. I think in the big picture at the time, I think he felt bad for me. I think now that he's reconnected with Amy and they've worked together to hurt me, I realize I don't know. I can't comment on that right now. A lot of my anxiety around school board is I feel like I'm reliving the school board with Chris Rath as superintendent and Cass Ardinger as president and Bill Glahn, and meetings were stressful. And I had a couple of friends on the board that would fill me in on what was said about me when I wasn't there. I remember in the wake of me suing the district and the board having to discuss it, and obviously I can't be there to discuss it because I'm the one doing the suing, Bill Glahn, who was a school board member at the time, suggested that Chris hire me back and then fire me. Okay. And everyone chuckled about that. And that was hard for me because I had to walk into school board meetings knowing that a group of people sat around with cocktails and talked about me. And that's unsettling. When you're on a board, that's a bad way to feel. As a board member, as I've gone through now, I'm starting year 14 in January. I've had several years of amazing school board experiences where I truly felt like one of the nine. I didn't feel less than anyone. I felt valued and included. I was asked to be on hiring committees, etc. Now that we're here in this reality, the last 3 years, 3 years ago election, the election that came up for this year, that was the beginning of a really, really negative time for me on the board. And it wasn't that anything is wrong with the people on the board. They're all fine people. They all have children and families and they work hard. But as a board, you really want nine people that don't have a lot to do with each other outside of the board. You're best to have nine people from a variety of walks of lives and neighborhoods and income demographics and professions and social groups. And I jokingly say that our current school board feels to me like a table in a cafeteria. Mean Girls comes to mind. Now, be clear, I'm not saying the people on the school board are mean girls, but the movie Mean Girls illustrates so beautifully the power of gossip and tribal behavior and group dynamic. I described my feelings toward our current board with the word arrogant, and the behavior of one or two of the board members in that meeting was the epitome of arrogant. I do not believe they think they're being arrogant. I think they feel entitled to how they act. When you feel that you can say whatever you want in a non-public meeting, even if it's horrifyingly wrong or a lie or insulting or unprofessional, and everyone laughs at that, I feel very, very badly for a lot of the people in my district. So when I began the story of how I lost my job, I started with alarmingly unprofessional and unethical behavior on the part of Chris Rath. I accepted a separation agreement, so I offered a letter of resignation. And when you look at the heading of it, it says confidential separation agreement. Chris Rath gave my confidential separation agreement to a local newspaper, and she justified it by saying, well, I had showed it to someone else. Well, yeah, I showed it to my husband and I showed it to Roy. I didn't print it in a newspaper. The copy I showed to Roy was before I'd even signed it. It was what was proposed to me. I was rereading the conversations around that, and the school district attorney at the time was a guy named Ed Kaplan. He gave me 3 different reasons why she was allowed to give my separation agreement to the monitor, even though 13 others were not given because they're, confidential, but mine wasn't. Those kinds of behaviors are what I notice in the shift, when the air shifts. And I feel we have a board dynamic now that lends itself to some people know what's going on and other people don't. Some people are in the know and others aren't. Oftentimes conversations happen in both public and non-public that make it very clear that conversations have taken place amongst board members outside of the board that affect what happens in the board. Now, this is my perception. I'm quite sure if any board member listens to this podcast episode, they're going to have a big rage at me that I'm breaking some policy somewhere. I'm not using names. I'm not using specifics. My perceptions, how it feels to be me sitting in a chair. I have a couple of board members who look at me puzzled, like, why do you think everyone hates you? And in the middle of a disastrous, horrifying, what felt like an attack to me, neither of those people said anything. They said nothing. Sometimes silence is deafening. I've said that before. The blog post that I republished from Patch talks about why I ran for school board. The main reason was I couldn't imagine not being connected to the school district. I felt like I'd lost my family. So being a board member reconnected me to actually almost every staff member there, because as a board member now, they could talk to me and not fear retaliation from Chris Rath. But I also wrote about how I was treated unjustly. Like I felt like I was treated unjustly, which I was. And I also felt like it's good to have civic duties and follow through on those. During this time, when I was attempting to file a lawsuit against Chris Rath, she called me into her office one day, and she had 3 emails laid out in front of her. Now, granted, there were thousands of emails in my email account. I have it on a disk somewhere. She would have had to Google words like sex or, I love you, or maybe anatomical words, inappropriate emails that didn't belong on a school district server. Divorce, ex-wife, abuse, restraining order, all these kinds of words. So when I walked in, keep in mind, she's the superintendent. I'm a school board member. I'm part of the group of 9 that oversees her. Here, read these. And she watches me look at them. Of course, I blushed. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, just, if you continue on this path, these can be read by anybody, which of course isn't true. They weren't government created documents. It was email. personal email. They could be subpoenaed and used in redacted form in a legal proceeding. She couldn't publish them in the Concord Monitor, but she made it sound like if I continued my fight, that she would do this. I continued the fight anyway, and of course it never happened. But I look at that behavior on the part of a superintendent, and it was known. She acted this way. That was what has been hard for me in my job loss. That school board members know that things are wrong, and they do them anyway, and they come up with reasons for them. The other thing I didn't like initially about the school board is how six of the 9 members live in walking distance to the SAU, to the school board office. I didn't like that. And for several years, we had people from all over town, and we don't anymore. And I'm one of the people that I live the closest, I think, to the SAU office. That makes me sad because this little neighborhood, the greater Whites Park neighborhood, although it's where I grew up, does not at all represent or reflect the entire city and the needs of students and teachers and families in our town. I'm not popular in Ward 5. I won 8 wards. I got second in one and fourth in my own where I live. So in my first blog post, I talked about all of the things that Chris Rath had done in trying to prevent me from suing her and how she could have avoided all sorts of legal fees had she not acted so erroneously. I culminate this blog post with saying, I'm going to tell the story of how someone with 21 years of unblemished service could lose her job in 4 months. So that was sort of starting at the end. Let's go back to the beginning. And if we go back to the beginning, we would go back to 2005 when I met Amy and Roy. And I've talked a lot about that in an episode a long time ago called The Note in the Backpack. My friendship with Amy was a huge shift. It didn't take me long to know that something was not okay in that friendship. And her insistence on crossing boundaries, and just after a while, it became alarming. Long before I was anywhere near losing my job, I was doing a sabbatical. So I was spending a lot of time at Molly and Gracie's elementary school. Molly was in kindergarten, Gracie was in 2nd grade. Morgan was also in 2nd grade. Morgan was in Gracie's grade. And I remember Amy really just imposing herself upon me all the time. Roy was gone by now, just the restraining order thing that I talked about a couple of episodes ago. Amy was livid that I had moved Gracie out of Morgan's classroom. I just needed that separation. I wanted Gracie to be with a group of friends that she connected with that were separate from that. Nothing against Morgan. She's a sweet child. But with that class would have come lots of connections to Amy and to Bob, who was living with her now. During the course of that school year, the principal of that school asked me to speak to a guardian ad litem about the ongoing situation with Amy and Roy and the safety of the young girls. There were lots and lots of neighborhood complaints and school complaints worrying about the safety of Morgan and Teresa. This might have been later on, maybe after my sabbatical. I'm not sure. But I remember going to the principal and saying, look, I'm a little worried and nervous about taking part in this because they could threaten me and hurt me. I'm afraid of Amy and Bob. And I was. And I believe at the time I had not reconnected with Roy, or maybe I just had, but I was still a little bit leery of him. And I remember the principal at that time, God, I can see her face, telling me, keep this all on school district email. Make sure it's on district email because that will be important. If anything comes to light, it's all together. And the GAL letter, the guardian ad litem, reached out to me on school district email. And so I did. And this would be a mistake for me. My second blog post rather, was called A Life Twisted by School Officials. And in this one, my theme is, I said yes. So in my email this week, I will have included a link to one of my favorite songs from the musical Oklahoma, sung by a character named Ado Annie. I'm just a girl who can't say no. And she's, of course, talking about dating men and all this kind of stuff. It's hilarious. But I talk all the time about my inability to say no and how I say yes to things even when I'm in the midst of the shifted air, when everything about my reality is subtly foreboding, and I say yes anyway. It's in this blog post, too, that I talk about 1,000 tiny steps. I hadn't started my WordPress site yet at the time of writing this, so I talk about my first of 1,000 tiny steps. In my inability to say no when being asked for help, I ponder things. Why did Chris Rath turn on me so much? I remember in my years in the district, she hired me. She hired me. I went for an interview. I was not a good fit for the job she interviewed me for. I was working out at the Y. She found me and called me at the Y, and I went in my sweaty clothes and a borrowed t-shirt for a job interview and was hired at Walker School. And I never forgot that. She was my advisor in graduate school. This is what also blows my mind. How somebody can be so demented in their head that they hurt someone like this with such history. And it's this behavior that's subtle on the school board right now. And that's how I feel. Susan Noyes, that was the principal. Sue Noyes is the one that asked me. Yeah, it was the winter of 2009. So it was before Roy came back to speak to a GAL. And I did. I spoke to the GAL. I said, yes. I remember Kenny saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Stay away from that family. Amy and I weren't speaking anymore. And Roy, of course, was out of town completely. The only connections I had were in the fall initially when Amy wanted me to back up a story that Roy had sexually assaulted Morgan, which wasn't true. And she tried to convince the police that this had happened. And it was at that point that I stepped back. I remember going to the police myself. And Kenny was aware of all this, and he was really, really concerned for me. I remember leaving Christmas presents on the front porch of their house for Morgan and Teresa at that time, that year, 2008 Christmas, going into 2009. I said yes, because I felt like it was my duty as a teacher to support the situation. Didn't take Amy long to know that I had talked to the GAL. I expressed my concern. The GAL promised that I would be safe, which was impossible to promise. So I wrote about that. If I had said no, I wouldn't have gotten, had to go for all these restraining orders. If I had said no, Amy would never have had school emails of mine on school email heading. Had I said no, I wouldn't have had any part of it. But I was a teacher and I listened to a principal and I did as she asked. And I write, this was my first tiny step, right? My first tiny step. The second was in the spring of 2010. So now we have a whole year has gone by. I've missed a ton of school. Kenny's health is tanking. Roy and I have now become involved, which put immeasurable stress on me. If there was a year that I could have been called out for not really doing my job well, it would have been 2009, 2010. Spring of 2010 comes and I request personal time to go to the divorce hearing. I'm denied the time. The divorce hearing changes, the dates change, and then Kenny has a medical appointment and I need to go with him. So I go and ask again, and it's immediately assumed that I'm just switching the reason, that I'm still going to go to this divorce hearing. I'm not actually going to a doctor's appointment with Kenny. I had used my days. I was willing to take the day without pay. Like it wasn't, I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. But in my all of this going on, Jean Connolly, good friend of mine, Jean Connolly, suggested that I take the rest of the year off, like a mental health leave. I looked at him, I'm like, but this is where I'm happy. At this time, I was brought into the conference room at Concord High School with a whole group of people. Kim Blyer, who was my union rep, Jean, several other people. And I was accused of a couple of things. I was accused of shaking my butt out the window. And I couldn't even wrap my head around what he was talking about. And he claimed that somebody that a student had come with a complaint. And he gave me the name of the student. And I remembered the incident, but I had a student teacher from Plymouth in my class with me. And I said, okay, that student isn't even in the class, but here's what I did. Kenny was driving by, and I knew he was driving by because we had talked on the phone during my lunch. So I jumped up and down, danced all around, and he waved at me and everything else. And my class thought it was hilarious. That's the closest thing that I've ever done to shaking my butt in the window. But it wasn't the class that the student who allegedly complained said it was, or was in. Years later, I ran into this student and I asked her why she ever made that complaint. And she looked at me like I had 5 heads and she's like, I never did. Somebody else made it. This was also a time that I noticed that anytime something happened legally with Roy and Amy, I'd suddenly get in trouble at school. It's like she would call a complaint. And I said to Jean once, Jean Connolly, look, every time you call me in for something, you get a phone call from somebody, a community member, someone that doesn't say who they are, you get a weird email. It's right after a court hearing in this divorce case. Please understand I'm being targeted and harassed. And I just think that it was dismissed. I wasn't believed. And again, I said yes because I worried about Morgan and Teresa. I also shared my concern with my union rep that what happened to me would happen, and she assured me that it wouldn't. The third thing I did was I agreed, because Roy told me how important it was, to testify against demolishing Kimball School. Now, I wasn't alone in testifying on this. But when you combine it with all the complaints coming my way and Jean's close relationship with Chris Rath, he had his head so far up her butt, it's not even funny. I mean, the list of separation agreements in her tenure as superintendent, I think she was superintendent for like maybe 20 years at the most. Actually, I think like 15 years, if that. She had 14 people that she forced to resign, 14 separation agreements. You know who she didn't ask to resign, even after complaints? Howie Young, sexual predator. She let that one slide. She actually gave him an award, a teacher award, Teacher of the Year award. But I took the medical leave, and he manipulated and twisted that medical leave. When I came back in the fall of 2010, after Chris Rath sat me down and yelled at me and told me if I tried to retaliate, she would fire me. When I called up to say, look, I have an active restraining order situation here, is going to court retaliation, I called her, and her secretary simply said, she is not interested in speaking with you. She's a superintendent of schools. She has an employee in her school district who's being threatened and has a judge's suggestion to come right back if any harassment happens. Amy has gone into Concord High School, taken emails and turned them all around. The mistake I made was using the school email, again, at the suggestion and insistence of Susan Noyes, principal of Kimball Walker at the time. Right. That was doing, again, what I'm told by my superiors. During that summer, two other weird things happened. Steve Mello, the athletic director, and Tom Sicca, one of the assistant principals at Concord High at the time, reached out to me in the summer because two of my students in the spring of 2010 had not passed health, which means they couldn't play football. And they wanted me to give them the opportunity to do extra work to get a passing grade so they could go out for football. When I went looking for the documented emails, they were gone, which means somebody deleted them. I should have printed them. I followed exact protocol for what they asked me to do. I went into the school in the summer, put together packets of work, helped them finish the work and change their grades. This was one of the things that was listed on the reason I'm getting fired. But I did that. What else did I do? It was the testifying at the hearings. I testified at 4 hearings. I actually had tons of support from school district employees, including Sue Noyes, said principal. I remember the last meeting walking by Chris Rath, and she just glared at me with hatred. And it was shortly thereafter that I had the meeting with her. In between that testimony and my meeting with her, Tim Sullivan, a teacher at Kimball School at the time, said, I'm so sorry to hear about your job. And I looked at him like, what? What do you mean? And he says, oh, I heard that you'd lost your job. I'm like, where did you hear that? And he wouldn't really say where he'd heard it, just that it was out and about. And it was because of the testimony. So at the time, I thought it was just sort of dumb luck, that coincidence that Amy and Bob went to Chris Rath at right around the time I was doing the testimony. I now know for sure that Roy was a part of it, that in his narcissistic way of thinking, he wanted to really, really take everything from me so that I would have no choice but to be with him. It's how it works. When I look at every time I listen to him and how bad, disastrous things happened when I did what he said, and yet I did it again and again, things would fall apart. And I realize now that I am quite sure the reason he insisted Amy keep all the emails is because the school address was on them. Roy set it all up so that every single page had the school district heading. We'd cut and pasted and scotch taped pieces of paper together and then photocopied these packets. Like, it was a ridiculous amount of work. It was awful. And it, bit me in the ass. But I said, yes, I just did what I was told. So when you put all these things together, testimony against the building demolition, which was Chris Rath's big ego-driven, who cares what the taxpayers think? Who cares about beautiful buildings? I want everyone to remember me for doing this great 3 buildings at a time demolition of history and demolition of neighborhoods. I testified against that. The Amy complaints, the weird complaints in the spring of 2010 coming up to Amy's divorce. I knew that she would hurt me. My medical leave. And then the final thing in the fall of 2010 was being asked to step down from coaching. And when I look at all my mistakes, that was the biggest one. I simply should have said, no, I will continue to teach part-time and coach if you think I'm going to do too much. Letting go of the coaching just separated me from families that loved me. I had like 40 kids on cross country that year. It was heartbreaking. That was a huge mistake. But I don't say no. I agree to these things. Yes, sure. Yes, sure. Yes, sure. I end this blog post by saying, tiny step number 1, 2, 3. I said yes, I said yes, I said yes. Culminated in a confidential separation agreement that wasn't confidential at all. It went really fast. In January of 2010, I was fine. My job was fine. I was fine. In January of 2011, I was unemployed. So you have a superintendent acting completely unethically. You have a small number of board members and an assistant superintendent who clearly know what's going on. You can tell by people's body language and in later conversations by things they know. Donna Pally, who was the assistant superintendent at the time, she and Chris ran a tight ship and kept 90% of school district happenings from the board as a whole. The board president, Cass Ardinger, knew all of it. Before 2010, 2011 school year started, before I realized everything that would be on my reasons to fire Barb, I knew that I had a tenuous relationship with Chris Rath. When she hired me to go to the high school, when I made that shift, she gave me that. She has this nasty face. It's just this like face of hatred. When she makes a point and she wants you to know she's serious, she like glares at you and you feel like a 6-year-old that needed to go pee and was told to hold it and wet your pants. And now your mother's angry and judgy at you. That's how it felt. It was a really bad way to feel. And I had a really hard time making eye contact. Going back to switching to Concord High School, that was another huge mistake I made. I should have stayed at Walker School. If I had stayed at Walker School, I've said this before, I would still be teaching in the district and I'd still be coaching cross country. I'd have a really good retirement. I don't have any of those things now. But when I applied to go to the high school, I applied initially for a special ed job and I had an amazing interview and they really wanted me. And Jean's like, just do that again. Come apply for the health job. Do that again. And the PE and health department did not want me in the life studies. They did not want me there. They were awful in the interview. They were just silent and sullen. I was nervous wreck and Jean hired me anyway. And I'm like, Jean, if they didn't pick me, don't pick me. And he did. And so my first couple of years at the high school felt just like I feel on the board now. Like Russell Young, the other health teacher, had cabinets of curriculum. I was given an empty room with nothing, like 20 textbooks. That was it. No material, no curriculum whatsoever. When I went to Bill Whitmore, the athletic director, he went to Russell Young and said, you need to, where's all the curriculum? And Russell said, well, I have mine. And so he was forced to give me some of it, but it was just basic. I had no posters on my walls. I had nothing. When Russell left midway through that year and Julie Marshall came, she unlocks the cabinet and there's like so much, it was so hurtful that he had cabinets full of posters and materials and movies and videos and activities that he just didn't share with me. The good side of it is I had to make up a lot of stuff, but it was wrong. It was just utterly wrong that he did that. But again, it was like this little group. They all had lunch together. I didn't. I ate alone in my classroom. I actually ate next door with Stan Lloyd and Kari Zwick. We had a group. Oh, it was wonderful. That was an inclusion class next door. I loved eating lunch with that group. But I had no connection to my department, and department meetings were a joke. I remember Stan Lloyd was super helpful. He understood what I was going through. He witnessed it and could see it. And he was so disgusted by Russell Young's behavior. And the PE teachers were awful to me. I remember Ham Manel. Sorry, Ham, you still work at the high school, but you were awful to me and you know you were. I was treated just like such an outcast in the PE department. I got right up in face, yelled at by Ham on more than one occasion. It was alarming and scary. A lot of his athletes have had right up in the face yelling as well. But I look back on it and what did I do? I just tried harder to get them to like me. It's just kind of pathetic and sad. Like me, I want you to like me. Yeah, it reminds me of Sally Field when she won her Oscar. You like me, you really like me. I often say I don't care what people think about me, but I do care, and I need to learn not to care. I need to stay true to the mission, even if it brings hatred from others. So I'll stop here for now. The key pieces are the shift in the mood, the shift in the weather. The leaves suddenly flip over and they're shiny now. A beautiful sunny day can turn into a thunderstorm in an instant, but it starts with subtle shifts. Wow, the birds aren't singing anymore. They're real quiet. You notice these little things. And I need to learn to pay attention to life's subtle cues. And I need to pay attention to them in school board meetings because I definitely feel, and I don't have a person. When my first year on the school board, I had Nick Metalius. Hi, Nick, up in heaven. And so he was like my person. I don't have a person. I thought I did. And I realized I really don't. I really truly am on my own in this. And maybe that's my lesson now. But my troubles do connect back to prior experience. And it's not because I can't handle it or because the things happening aren't bad. It's because I've seen it before and it's all too familiar. I don't like being on the receiving end of unjust treatment. I will own up to any mistake I've made, but don't tell me following protocol and trying to find out the truth and making sure we're all doing it correctly is wrong, because it isn't. No good deed is what I called all of these articles. And the main reason I called them no good deed is because the whole thing started with me saying yes to talking to the guardian ad litem about Amy and Roy's divorce and the treatment of their children. And I started the blog post with Oscar Wilde, who is credited with saying no good deed goes unpunished. And Jack is learning an empathy thing in his preschool, and it's called filling my bucket. And when you do something nice for someone, you fill their bucket, but you also fill your own bucket. So you do a good deed and it fills your bucket, except sometimes those good deeds do not go unpunished. It's sort of like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. All my good intentions lost me my job. No good deed, my friends, goes unpunished. Next week, I'll talk about the individual allegations against me. And some of them occurred allegedly in the fall, and then others were made up. And I will be very open and clear on who the people were that made the allegations and signed off. A couple of them still work in the district. One has a pretty prominent job in the district. But these people did this to me. And while I've had a measure of forgiveness with some of them, not with all of them. And well, let me be clear. I'm not walking around not forgiving them. I know the pressure people like Chris Rath can put on people. And if somebody was threatening my job, I'd like to think I'd stand up in the face of it. But I also know that I might not if I was really nervous about losing my job. Things that bother me most, in summary, about my job loss are corrupt behavior on the part of a superintendent, an inappropriate relationship between a superintendent and a school board president, too close, too tight, too daily occurring. School board presidents are not certified superintendents. Those things contributed to my job loss. A board that was made up of a social group. They had, not only were they board members together, but they were friends. And so there's that friend loyalty. We have a lot of friend loyalty on our current board right now. It's alarming. I have to really try not to scowl when I watch all of the little inside jokes, and I don't know. It's hard for me to watch because it's embarrassing. And maybe that sounds judgy, but there's an entire school district of employees and students and families that rely on us to be good people. I have a couple of guests that will be coming on that also have similar experiences to mine that will be interesting to talk to. So I realize it's the holiday season and maybe you want me to be all fluffy and jingle jangle and all that, but nope, you're going to get the deep dive truth about me losing my job. Speak out against a building demolition, speak out against a superintendent who's very corrupt and power hungry, make a bad mistake in not honoring your marriage and getting sucked into a relationship with somebody that had no good intentions for me ever from day one. I was a very, very good tool. Start the whole thing by making a friendship and sticking in a friendship that was clearly dangerous from day one. Those are the things I did. That's my ownership of my story. So be good to yourself. Be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.